Being around the most creative people in the industry is where we wanted to be.
But what we love most of all is taking everything that we've learned over the last 14 years, whether it's fashion or photography or all of our wedding and event experience, and bringing it to you each and every week. Hello, I'm Stephanie Boye, and you are watching Notes from the Lightbox, where you get the best wedding advice and tips delivered straight. So when I was thinking about this week, I was thinking about what can I do a video on that is something every bride and groom asks me. And I would have to say a lot of people ask us about a second shooter. How important is the second shooter? The second shooter is not essential, but it is preferred by most wedding photographers. And I'm going to give you some really great reasons why you might want to consider a second photographer. Realistically, logistically, one photographer can only be in one place at one time. So there are shots that will be missed. For example, if you're getting ready, the bridesmaids, all of, the bride's family is all in the bridal suite. And so much happens on the day of the wedding with the bride and the bride's suite. And the groomsmen often are the ones who get left behind. And historically, people don't worry about these photographs as much, but they are super important. They do tell a great part of the day. There's so many funny moments that happen with the groomsmen, so you might want to consider having someone in each place. If you're in the same hotel or somewhere close, your first photographer might be able to get over there. But again, what shots are you missing that's happening in the bridal suite that's so important at that time when your photographer is leaving? At the ceremony, the second photographer is super important too, because the first photographer is likely positioned at the altar where the groom is, and they're getting the groom's reaction shots. Maybe they're crying, maybe they're anxiously awaiting your arrival, and they're also getting the long, beautiful shot of you and your father or whoever's escorting you down the aisle. It's a beautiful, iconic picture. But there's a lot of things that happen at the back of the church before you walk down with your dad. That's a very emotional moment. So it's really nice to have a second photographer who's there to get that shot. And that photographer can then go hit another vantage point at the ceremony and maybe get reaction shots of your guests, maybe an overall, maybe a bird's eye view from a choir loft or something like that. So it is nice to have two different vantage points at your ceremony, because your principal photographer is going to be concentrating mostly on what's going on between the two of you and whoever your officiant is. You also have to remember that the second photographer is a great help and assistance to the first photographer. For example, if your first photographer is shooting the cocktail hour, the second photographer can be shooting your reception room before the guests walk in. If your first photographer is doing portraits, your second photographer can be watching the guest and make sure that no dresses are wrinkled, or making sure that everybody's sort of in line, or getting the next group of people together and ready for the principal photographer to do portraits. Additionally, photographers love to use off-camera lighting. Off-camera lighting gives dimension to all of your photographs, especially at the reception. So when you're doing your first dance or your parent dances, it's really nice to have an additional light source in the room besides just the photographer, what's over their camera, because that's going to make just sort of flat one-dimensional lighting. But when you have a secondary light source that the second photographer is walking around the room holding, it really creates a richness and a dimension to your photographs that would be missing if they weren't there. Weddings rarely run on time. So if your timeline is so incredibly crunched, the second photographer is really a great asset to the principal photographer, because they can take care of some of the portraits while the principal photographer takes care of other portraits, and you're cutting the timeline down in half for what you had allocated for portraits. Look, here's the truth. Second photographers, generally speaking, aren't that much money. You should definitely talk to your studio and find out what is the additional cost in your package to have that second photographer. Because in the end of the day, at the end of the wedding, they're contributing probably about 30% of the images that you will see in your final gallery. So in a gallery of 800 to 1200 images, you're probably going to have about 300 from your second photographer. All that said, most photographers are totally fine shooting a wedding all by themselves. It may not be their preference, but I'm sure that that's how they started their career, as most wedding photographers did, on their own. So it's not the end of the world. It's not the end of your wedding pictures. They're going to be brilliant. And certainly, if it means the difference between getting a photographer you love and paying a little bit more money and less for the second shooter, and having one that you're so about and having a second shooter, go for the photographer that you love. As long as they're willing to do it, you're absolutely going to be fine with one photographer. Check in with your studio and ask them, how much does it cost to add a second shooter to the package? it may not be that big of a deal, and you might decide it's totally worth it. But if you're still sitting the fence, maybe talk to the photographer, see what they say, see how they feel about working alone, and that might just help you make your decision to have a second photographer or to not. I hope you found this information useful. If you'd like to see more videos, please go to our website at www.notesfromthelightbox.com, and there you can subscribe and send us any of your burning questions. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for watching.